Also in the news recently, the Supreme Court ruled in a case. Uh, there was a lawsuit that was brought about by some Asian American students against Harvard and Harvard University and University of North Carolina based on their admissions focusing on race. And the Supreme Court ruled that race should not be a factor um, when admitting, when having to fill out an application, and it should not be used as a metric to admit students into college. Which pretty much ended affirmative action in college admissions. But this didn't just affect college admissions, but also it will affect, the ruling will affect employers and potentially even private groups and other organizations on how they choose to hire people, or how they choose to initiate people or admit people into that particular group. And a lot of people gave criticisms based around the fact that they believe minorities need affirmative action because of the racial bias that exists in various institutions, or what we like to call institutional racism. But when we look at affirmative action and we look at how it was implemented, one of the brothers who has been a pioneer of Black power in this country, Claude Anderson, was actually the person who really wrote the initial minority bill for affirmative action in 1971 in the state of Florida. That was later taken, and then it was changed and sort of manipulated to include other groups, and to also include handicapped people. And it took the focus specifically away from just Black people to being more inclusive to other groups. And Claude Anderson was very upset about this because, in his words, something for everybody is for nobody. And, he felt that at that point, he really was against affirmative action. I would really like to hear some recent commentary from him on this decision to see, what he thinks about how it happened. But what I want to do is play a clip by Dr. Claude Anderson of him talking about this, also followed up by Dr. Amos Wilson, who's going to also talk about what Dr. Claude Anderson talks about, is white women using affirmative action or using the minority benefactor and taking power away from Black people by being able to insert themselves in these policies that people think were just created for Black people. So this is coming from the YouTube channel. My Name Is My Name. So using this video from their channel.
I have the dubious honor of being the person that wrote that first affirmative action plan for the state of Florida in 1971 that went all over the country, a comprehensive plan. I didn't write the plan for minorities, poor folk, Asians, Hispanics, Arabs, midgets, humpbacks, lesbians. I wrote it for Black folk. But immediately the whole frame of reference is the way you keep Black folk down is always dilute and water something, make pretend it's for everybody. And that way anything for everybody is for nobody. And so they took that minority program, the affirmative action program, made it a minority program. And said, now I want the affirmative action program to die for that reason. In 1999, I go down to Texas, and a program was written for Black folk. I look at the amount of money in state contracts in Texas that year, and white women got 78%. And nobody in our Black leadership, in our Black overclass, and the Black civil rights movement ever said, hold a second, how are you going to put white women into a minority, into an affirmative action program set up for Black folk when she was right along with the white man? She co-owned, co-controlled, co-influenced, co-herited, and everything that the white slave owner had, she had it too. She sat in the same house, under the same table, slept in the same bed, and raised his kids. How is she entitled to be competitive with black men or black people in the society. But our black leadership didn't say anything. So white women went into the affirmative action program and took it over and dominated. That's why you go to check Coca-Cola about 3 years ago, Coca-Cola company, almost 66% of all the money on the minority program went to white women. And in Texas, white women got 78%, and Hispanics got 21%, and blacks got 0.9%. Because again, we don't know how to play the game. We keep buying into these myths about people, about these very broad, ambiguous groupings. And all of that stuff started immediately after the Civil War.
And very interesting, white women are not afraid, and the white feminists are not afraid to talk about power. We as African Americans seem to have a problem with talking about power. But these women will talk about empowerment just as they talk about anything else. And they're clear that they want real power in this society. I was reading a piece here the other day where you have now lending institutions that are designed to lend money to women going into business exclusively, not including men and other minorities. I'm saying that because you see, one of the things that black folk are, we are over-inclusive. We want to bring everybody in on the party. And we've been made guilty when we don't bring everybody in. And here's a group that's founded, it's lending institutions and so forth. And their stated purpose is to lend to women, specifically to white females, exclusively, and support their economic growth and development.
So you see, as Claude Anderson and Avis Wilson are both saying in these clips here, is that the problem with these different policies that are supposed to, on its face, help black people, because everyone else is always included in these categories, which with what they like to call minorities, then they continue to dominate the majority of the resources that are put aside for the policies that are implemented. And one of the reasons why I feel as though, personally, affirmative action being ended is a positive thing for black people in today's times is because we need to really refocus and rechannel our energy within our own community. And not just here, our community here in the United States, but in the diaspora, the African continent. Channel our focus and our resources into that. Instead of focusing on trying to get into Harvard or the University of North Carolina, to further indebt ourselves into the European framework, take that energy, put it into the African framework, and let's build up real African black power. One of the articles that came out directly after this took place was this article on Bloomberg that said black colleges face crunch as Supreme Court ruling drives influx of students. Now, this ruling just took place. How are they anticipating that this is already driving an influx of students? It's only been a few days since this ruling came down. But even though the headline is stating that, what they're really doing is they're forecasting that by 2026, colleges like Morehouse and other HBCUs expect a 100% increase in applications due to this affirmative action ruling. And this could be, a lot of times we get propaganda that comes from the left or comes from other interest groups to try to scare people or in some cases prepare people for what can happen. But it's really driving your mind in a place where they can then use you as an asset for the agenda that they're trying to push. I would look at this headline as a positive. If HBCUs are getting more applications. That means that HBCUs are growing, becoming more powerful. Why is this used and being presented to us out of fear that this is something negative? So I thought that was very interesting. I heard a few pundits on Fox News talk about, affirmative action, and then they also talked about how Florida was the first state to effectively end affirmative action, and they talked about the results of what happened in Florida in the university educational system, as well as in the employment sector when that happened. But now that this has been done on a federal level, we'll see. But I believe that my philosophy has always been the same as Marcus Garvey's: do for self. And black people, I believe, will be stronger in the long run if we focus on our own communities, building up our own power within our own framework, an African-centered framework, not a European-centered framework, and ultimately that will heal even the issues that we see with these mass shootings and this cultural crisis that we're in. If we start to really redirect our attention and our focus within the African community.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have known, most of us who kept abreast of this issue have known for a long time that across the board, particularly in business, in the corporate world, but also in higher education, the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action, have been white women. How they became a minority, beginning with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They were included in parts of it as being oppressed. The oppressors themselves were oppressed, and so that's just a simple statement of fact. In terms of the schools that some people of African descent may not be able to get into, when you look at the products, Clarence Thomas, Barack Obama, Brown Jackson, and others, what you see is people who are primarily educated to work in different ways, to continue the hegemony of the American empire. And they're thrown up to the masses of people as examples of what people can achieve. Now, Clarence Thomas has always had an axe to grind with affirmative action because he feels that one of the reasons he didn't get the kind of offers that he expected to get when he graduated from, was it Yale Law School, was because people viewed him as only being in the school because of affirmative action. And that's true. Clarence Thomas has been, it's amazing, Clarence Thomas has been probably the major beneficiary of affirmative action in this country. As a Supreme Court justice, right, for 32 years. But he's always had axe to grind because he thought he should have gotten offers from some of these big Wall Street law firms that he didn't get, and he wound up having to take a job as a clerk to a senator from Missouri, but that started his career. And then once again, when Thurgood Marshall, I don't know, what Thurgood Marshall's physical condition was to try to hang on for a couple of years until the next election. We know Beta Ginsburg made a horrible decision. She should have retired during the Obama administration. For those people who are all think this value in having people, you know, like Brown Jackson on the Supreme Court. But when Thurgood Marshall retired, the demand, well, we want a black person to replace him. And so George H.W. Bush said, okay, we'll give you one. This goes back to what Amos always, be careful what you ask for. So, you know, you got Clarence Thomas, but in general terms, when you look at, you basically looking at, you know, the people who are going to serve in the interests of the American empire.
Mm-hmm.
They come out of these Ivy League schools and these other, you know, Stanford and, you know, Duke and places, you know, the high ranked schools, you know, in the country. And that's basically what they do. So, you know, what you're talking about is an elite group of people who will now have to find other means to achieve their elite status. And they will, whether they go to Morehouse or Howard or wherever, you know, that's undergrad. They'll still get into grad schools, you know, at these places. So, you know, that's that's the way I look at it. So,
Mm-hmm.
I don't see this as anything that's relevant to the liberation and empowerment of African people. I mean, when you look at the people who, you know, are recognized as being the major contributors to African liberation, what schools did they go to?
Mm-hmm.
Malcolm X only had an 8th grade education, right? I mean, most of these people like Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, self-educated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people like Kwame Ture went to Howard, right? So, I mean, I don't see this as anything of significance, in my opinion, for the struggle for the liberation and empowerment of African people. For people who want to become elitists and serve the American empire, like Barack Obama and Clarence Thomas, yeah. So, but that's the way I look at it.